Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today I'm doing my State of the Collection for 2023. Normally, I typically do this a couple months later in the year, but I have a lull in terms of being able to record, and I've made a number of watch change-ups since last year at this point, so I think it's a good time to go ahead and do the snapshot, and hopefully I don't make any more big moves this year. You never know in this hobby, but we'll see what we can do. But before going into that, and I'll have plenty of footage, I have 14 watches currently in the collection, so we'll go through all of those so you can get a look at them, and I'll talk a little bit about them. But before doing all of that, I think it makes the most sense for me to go ahead and recap what is no longer in the collection that appeared in my State of the Collection 2022 video. So I believe I have released, if I'm looking at my list here, 6 watches from that time period. First one I'll note is I did get rid of my Marathon Field watch. The main reason is actually I found while I enjoyed the watch quite a bit and it wore well, I don't really wear field watches. So, I mean, outside of the pilot format, I suppose we could consider something like a Flieger a form of a field watch. But in terms of the more ground-based field watches, I don't really wear them, so I went ahead and I let that watch go. Another watch I let go that I was pretty fond of was my Tudor Blackbait Bronze. The main reason there is why I liked the aesthetic, I liked how the bronze aged, and I do somewhat lament not having a bronze watch anymore. The main issue there is the watch wore very large. Now, it didn't hang over my wrist in terms of lug to lug, and it's also not the largest diameter watch, even compared to my current collection. It's not the largest diameter watch that I have or had ever owned, but it's a very thick watch. It wore big. And as I had more experience with other dive watches, I just decided that one was a good one to go ahead and release. I also got rid of my Spring Drive Grand Seiko watch. I talked a little bit, I think, in the last video about considering getting rid of that watch. And I mainly wore that as a dress watch. And so I started for this year, I slimmed down on the number of dress watches I have because I wanted to move into a higher end dress watch piece. So that was one of the sacrificial lambs to go ahead and make space and financial sense for that upcoming watch purchase that I have now in the collection. Another couple watches that are in that similar boat is the Cartier Santos. Same thing, wore really well, pretty large watch, but again, it was a dress watch and I was trying to scale back on that, so I let go of the Santos. I also let go of the IWC Portuguese, which again, very large watch, but a dress watch, and I didn't need this many dress watches in the collection. The last one that was in the State of the Collection 2022 video that I did get rid of was my Tiso PRX. That's the quartz model of the PRX watch. I got that so I could try out what it was like to own an integrated bracelet sports watch. And so I got that out of that watch. It was enjoyable in terms of a watch. I did like it. The problem is I have a G-Shock, and between that and the Tissot PRX, when I wanted to reach for a quartz grab-and-go watch, I was always grabbing the G-Shock. And again, the Tissot PRX, it's an integrated sports style watch, but relatively elegant. I'm not going to say I was using it as a dress watch, but when I didn't need a dress watch, the G-Shock just made so much sense that I just wasn't putting any wrist time in on the Tissot after the first few weeks with it. So I ultimately did let that one go. I do have one other watch that did not appear in the State of Collection 2022. I got it after I did that video, but I've gotten rid of it before doing this video, and that was one I actually liked quite a bit, the Glashütte Original PanoMaticLunar. And the reason is again, I was wearing that more in a dress watch format. A lot of them do come sort of dress watch configured, but this one was on the steel bracelet. But that asymmetrical dial plus wearing it as a dress watch, and I ended up letting that go to free up more funds and space for another asymmetrical dress watch, which I will cover in a little bit. Those are the changes, or the things that have gone since 2022. So let's go ahead and hit on the 14 watches for 2023. Now, I think last year's video, I did these in kind of a configuration and order, like novelty watches, sports watches, dress watches. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. This time I'm going to do it more chronological, not the actual order of the acquisitions, but what I'm going to do is my very first State of the Collection video was 2021. So I'm going to do the watches that I had in that video first, then the watches that I still have from the 2022 video, and then we'll do I'm looking at my list, 5 watches that I have picked up in since 2022's video that I still own. So we'll go ahead and we will start with a watch I've already mentioned a couple of times, and that is the G-Shock. So this was a gift, And I wear this watch all the time. It is my go-to quartz watch. It is not my only quartz watch in the collection. I do have one other quartz watch. However, that watch is a novelty watch, so I only wear it situationally. But if I'm doing yard work, car work, I just want something that I don't need to set. I do usually have a mechanical watch that's still set, but a lot of times it just makes a lot of sense to go ahead and grab this watch. If I'm doing exercise, it's my favorite watch. The main thing that's different now versus any of the other videos that I've done is this is now on a Barton band because I did get the hardware to go ahead and install to use regular straps. I was okay with the resin strap. I thought the resin strap the GShock came with is comfortable as long as it's dry. But if it's wet, like if you're sweating or if you're in the rain, it starts to, in my opinion, chafe a little bit and become uncomfortable. So a silicone band, I feel, works a lot better on this watch. I like the watch a lot more even with, I liked it before, but way more with this sort of configuration. So this is working a lot better for me than it had before. And so it is definitely a keeper in the collection. I wear this watch probably more than any other just because it fits so many good scenarios. And I am a big fan of encouraging people, if they like the shapes, and there are a lot of shape choices, to go ahead and take a look at getting a Casio GShock if you want something robust. All right, next watch is my Rolex Explorer II. Now, this is the watch that amongst my entire collection I've owned the longest. I have had, I think 15 years now. I wasn't really a collector of watches. This was my one watch that I did everything in for over a decade. And then after a job change, I picked up another Rolex. And then I started to educate myself as I learned about that there were other brands besides Rolex in terms of nice watches, high quality watches, luxury watches, however you want to describe them. And that's how I fell down the rabbit hole that I'm in today. This is still one of my most favored watches in the collection. I can't really imagine it ever leaving simply because I've owned it for so long. I have had it serviced. It was running fast after a while. I think the service was 2 or 3 years ago. And so it's got a lot of marks on it because I used to do everything I do in the GShock, I used to do in this Rolex. I didn't care. If it was changing the oil in the car or cutting back tree branches, this watch was still going to be on my wrist because really it was the only watch I had. I think I had a couple junker watches lying around somewhere, but I didn't even bother. I would just wear this. It had scratches. I bought it used. They weren't expensive back in the day. I mean, they were expensive for me compared to anything I had owned before, but compared to where a lot of these watches are at in today's environment, these were quite the bargain in the mid 2000s. So anyway, it remains a part of the collection at this stage. Next watch that was in my 2021 video is my JLC, or Jaeger LeCoultre, if I'm remotely pronouncing that right, Reverso. So this is the one dress watch that did not get purged in the great 2022 watch purge of dress watches to get into a higher end dress watch. I've always been a big fan of the Reverso shape. I got this watch when I was still initially debating between this and the Cartier Tank. I actually prefer the Cartier Santos as a shape, and I also prefer the Arabic numerals that JLC does on this model and a number of their models of the Reverso over the overly formal, in my opinion, Roman numeral format. So I went with this. It is a watch that, it's not my most complimented watch, but it's one of the few watches that's actually been complimented by people who are not quote unquote watch people. So, I mean, it calls attention to itself probably just because it's a rectangular shape. Very comfortable default leather strap that it came on. I've never changed that out. It does have quick release, so I could, but it's held up well. I do still wear it quite a bit, mostly in formal occasions, of course, because that is what the purpose of the watch is in this day and age. But it is a favorite. And so when I was getting rid of those other dress watches, I just couldn't pull the trigger on getting rid of the Reverso. These also tend to trade a bit more now than they did back when I got this. In part, I don't know if that's post-pandemic stuff or if it's because Richemont keeps jacking up the prices on all their JLC watches. But regardless, it's one that I'm not really been considering to release from the collection, though I do have another dress watch at this point that I favor more. Watch number 4, and this is the last of the watches that I still have that were in my 2021 State of the Collection video. This is a Mr. Jones watch. This is the Ricochet. This is the one with the 3 foil robots that are playing pinball. As longtime viewers of the channel know, I am in the pinball hobby. I've been in the pinball hobby far longer than watch collecting. I've been in pinball for over a decade at this point. You know, I have a collection of games. I would go and play competitively. I go to pinball shows. I co-host 2 different pinball podcasts. So pinball, I do a lot. I do more in pinball than I do in watches, actually. And so this watch was designed by Ryan Claytor. He is well known within the pinball space because he did some t-shirt designs and such over the years. I've actually commissioned him back many years ago, well, not all that many years ago, to do a neon sign for me. And this was the second watch he did with Mr. Jones Watches. This is the limited edition. So they did this run of 100, and this watch has stayed in the permanent collection. It's a little bit different if you go for the modern version, the non-limited version. The background for the robots is different. There's no, I don't believe they have the running seconds disc is actually kind of doing a flicker effect down here in the pop bumpers and where inserts would be near the slings, for those familiar with the anatomy of a pinball machine. But regardless, it's definitely a watch for a pinball person. And if you're into the overall format, I mean, the coolest part about it is the foil robots. It does have a jump hour. The minutes are in 5-minute increments. It's on a spinning disc, so the disc is always spinning. This is a mechanical watch. Also, this is the watch that to date I have had far more compliments on than anything else in my collection combined, in fact. But as I often have to caveat with that, I wore it to a pinball show. So if there was a crowd that was going to notice what it was and actually care about it, it would be at a pinball show. But definitely a very cool watch. They're quite approachable on Mr. Jones's website in terms of pricing. They tend to go out of stock a lot, so I'd bookmark the page and suggest just following up if it's something that you're really into and want to see about purchasing for yourself. Okay, so now we're moving into the watches that were in the 2022 video. And the first one I'm going to start with is my red dial Orient Cano. The Orient Cano comes in a number of dial configurations in terms of colorways, but this was a gift. I had it on a list of mine because I really liked the red. I like how it played with the light. And so I was interested in the watch, and I did end up getting it. I do currently have it on a Barton silicone band. The bracelet that comes with the Orient watches, probably in general, but I'll just speak in terms of the Orient Cano since it's the one I've owned. They're basically garbage tier. They're not totally uncomfortable, and they're actually relatively easy to size because they used cotter pins, but overall, it's not a great bracelet experience, especially if you've handled watches with higher end bracelets. And as noted already, you've seen my Explorer II. It's a much superior bracelet, even though it's far older. So I've found silicone works really well. This is a dive watch. It is the largest watch diameter-wise in my collection at 44 millimeters. However, as is often the case, lug to lug is the key with watches like this. So it's actually, even though my wrist is 6.75 inches, it's wearable for me. I wear this watch quite a bit, actually. It is not my only day date. I do have one other that we will be getting to. But for a while, it was the only watch I had that was a day date. Not a complication I'm particularly enamored with, but it's sort of neat. Bezel action on these Orients, or at least this Orient, is weird. It has a very ratchety sound, ratchet like the instrument. And so it's a little not super difficult to turn. I would say most people, if you've handled other dive watches, maybe higher end dive watches, you might not like this one in particular in terms of how it just feels different. But that's what I think so interesting about it, is it plays very different. It sounds different. Sounds different than Seiko. It sounds different than any other dive watch I've handled. And it's a pretty easy wear on the silicone. So overall, my biggest issue I had with this was actually that while it was within the movement's parameters, it wasn't particularly accurate. This is one of the watches in my collection, or that I've had over the years, that I have opened up and regulated myself. And so this is just one of those watches that when I feel like I want to wear something more bright, this is a good summer watch because of the red. This is what I reach for. And I remain a big fan of it. So it's one that I've enjoyed and plan to keep. Next watch from 2022 that I still have is another gift. This was, or is, I should say, the Spiro Agnew watch from a former watchmaking company called the Dirty Time Company. I have an entire video about the history of this watch. It is, I think, a really fascinating story because most character watches are more fun in the sense of, hey, Mickey Mouse, that's fun, right? People like Mickey. This watch exists because people didn't like Spiro Agnew, who was a vice president. He was vice president under Richard Nixon. You might not know his name very well because he resigned in disgrace and was replaced by Gerald Ford, who thus became president when Richard Nixon resigned in disgrace. But anyway, this watch, some friends of mine from pinball had seen one of these, and then another friend of mine that I actually podcast with bought this for me as a gift. I tried to repair it myself. I could only get it to work intermittently, so I actually paid a watchmaker to get this running. This is the only watch I have in my collection, or have ever had in my real collection. I've worked on some old like Timexes and stuff, but it's a pin lever escapement. That's the cheap escapement that was used in watches before quartz became a big and affordable deal. Things like Timex and such used those. You didn't have the little pallets with the jewels. It was metal on metal. They weren't really designed to be serviced. They were designed to be used and thrown away, but that's how the watches were so cheap while still being mechanical. So I don't remember what this sold for back when it came out in 1969. I think something on the order of $10 to $15. And you can readily find these because I believe they estimated, I don't think they did an exact count. I believe there's an estimate that this type, and there were clones. I won't say they were like clones we think of today where they were identical. There were other watches that used Spiro Agnew that had like different sketches of him and such that weren't by the Dirty Time Company, which was the first. But 10,000, I believe, is the estimate that they made 10,000 of these. So you can still find these a lot in antique shops and stuff. And if you want to get them serviced, hey, it's a weird, interesting piece. I won't go into the whole history of why this watch exists. Go ahead and check out my other video talking about the Spiro Agnew watch if you'd like to know more. All right, my second Mr. Jones watch. This Mr. Jones is the only watch brand I currently own more than one watch from, and I own two. And so this is Step Right Up. Step Right Up is the other watch, the first watch that Ryan Claytor designed. I did not get this watch initially. Again, 100-piece limited edition. This watch never did enter the main collection, and so the only ones out there are the 100 that were made. This is a quartz watch. It's like a arcade shooting gallery, and so again, most of the dial is occupied by these kids and this dad and this carnival barker, trying to do the step right up and shoot the target sort of thing. So it's more of a fun watch than a time-telling piece, but simple quartz movement, it's going to be relatively accurate, like any affordable quartz watch would be. Unfortunately, they didn't sell enough, as my assumption, in terms of why it never entered the main collection. But this was a gift from another person that I do my other podcast with on pinball. Got it for me a couple years ago. And so, again, I've worn this to shows. It gets less attention than Ricochet, probably in part that this is not pinball themed, and the shows I go to tend to be oriented around pinball, and also in part that these don't have 3 giant foil robots. Those foil robots on Ricochet can catch attention from like 30 feet away. This is a more painted dial that is far more subtle in how it plays with the light. Next watch, also featured in my 2022 State of the Collection, is my Stova Flieger Type B watch. So you can get these configured in a variety of ways. Stova is a German company based out of the Black Forest. They don't, to my knowledge, use authorized dealers. If you want Stova watches, you order directly from Stova. I got this in one of their advent calendar sales. So because Stova sells direct, getting a discount doesn't normally happen. But usually in December, they like to do an advent calendar sale where they take the watches that they bring with them to shows, throw new straps on them. And so they're essentially like gently used or shop-worn watches. They weren't sold, they weren't handled beyond the settings of going to events. But because they were handled, they go ahead and they mark them down. And what ends up on sale just depends. So it's always good to go around early December and check out Stova's website if you're interested in them. And they do far more than Fliegers. But the reason I got this is Stova was one of the 5 original Flieger manufacturers during World War II. And I was interested in the design. I like the design aesthetic. I really like the Type B dial because I think it's far more interesting than the Type A, which admittedly the Type A is far more practical for today's era where hours are more important than minutes. But as a historical sort of artifact, I thought it was very cool. Stova, though, didn't stick with the old case design. They curved the lugs. They made it far more wearable versus, I'd say, the other main Flieger manufacturer of original origin, which is LeCoultre, which for a long time, and when I bought this, didn't have modernized cases. They still used the old, they're smaller than the old days, but they didn't really modernize the lugs and such. In fact, LeCoultre does do that now. So FYI, it's easier to buy a LeCoultre than it is to find a Stova. So if you're in the market for this, you want something tied to the original manufacturers. LeCoultre is definitely one worth considering, even if you are more into the modernized case design. You can configure, both with LeCoultre and Stova, a lot of options in terms of date and such. Again, I tried to keep this, other than the modernized case, pretty authentic. This is hand wound. It's using a Solida-based movement. And there's no branding on the dial. It says Stova on the back on the movement itself, but otherwise no date. It's time only. Great loom. This is the best loomed watch in my collection. And as a Flieger, you would expect that. To some, it's probably a fairly boring watch, but aside from it being a historic oddity, I really like it. I like the matte black dial. I like the super loom on it. The only thing is I do not tend to wear this in the summer because I could take it off this leather strap, but this leather strap does not like sweat, or maybe it likes it too much. It becomes a bit of a sponge. So for that regard, I normally only wear this in the cooler months. So I've not been wearing it a lot lately, but I do pull this out regularly and put it on. All right, and this is the last watch that I featured in my 2022 State of the Collection. This is my Omega Seamaster 300 Professional. However, they got the whole long name. So basically, it's sort of James Bond style watch. Now, I did not get a James Bond colorway. I did not go with the blue. I did not go with the actual Bond branded watches. This uses the gray dial with the blue ceramic insert into the bezel. I really like Omega's gray dials. I'd say of all the brands that have done gray, Omega has done it in the way that I like the absolute best. I like how it plays with the light. I like the laser etched waves on this dial. I like the skeletonized hands. The lume is really good on this. The date is out of the way at the 6 o'clock. It's subtle but usable, and it's color matched. In fact, I like this dial configuration so much. I have found myself multiple times looking at another Omega watch with a similar colorway, such as an Aquaterra. But I keep telling myself, don't do it, Dennis. There's no point. You've already got an Omega and you've already got that color. So don't be too redundant. But gray is my favorite color. So currently I have this on a Barton is a brand I'm really fond of for straps, especially silicone. So the watch came on bracelet. I do occasionally put that on, but again, it's been hot lately. And so in the warmer temperatures, I do prefer silicone. Again, I've gone with, I actually changed this one out quite a bit. So I've tried all sorts of different color bands and stuff, but again, comfortable, fun to wear, a bit thick. That's probably my biggest complaint is this coaxial movement, which is, reasonably finished, machine finished on the back, but the thickness does not make this the best watch especially in warmer temperatures. Again, it is a dive watch. It is meant to be of size. The other thing that I've noted in my review video of this watch is the scalloped edges of the bezel. This is probably the hardest bezel of all of my dive watches that I've ever owned. I won't even say probably. It is definitely the hardest one to turn. It does have a really good aesthetic effect, or I should say acoustic effect. And I do like the ceramic look of it. So overall, I enjoy this watch. I do still wear it quite a bit regularly. This is probably the one that I keep more on these silicone bands than I do the bracelet though, because even when it's not super hot, this watch with the bracelet, which is not tapered, is very prone to hot spots on the wrist. However, there's so much other things going well for this watch aesthetically that I'm just like, I'll just put it on a third-party strap. I've also heard really good things about Omega's NATOs. I have worn this on NATOs before. In fact, I think in the 2022 video, I may have the footage of it on a NATO if you want to go back and look. But I've enjoyed the silicone straps far more than the NATOs. So that's the direction I've just generally gone with watches lately as my tastes have evolved. Okay, so now we're finally ready for the watches that were not in my 2021 or 2022 video. So I have picked up 5 since I did the State of the Collection for 2022. And the first one on the table, so the first one I'm going to grab is my Seiko. This is the let me cheat here, is the SRPH57. Okay, so this is a US edition Save the Ocean watch. The dial has this turtle shell texture to it. It's fitting because it's in the turtle case, cushion case shape that Seiko is well known for. This watch just aesthetically really caught my eye, but not just that. I really felt, especially because I do a watch YouTube channel, that I needed to get a Seiko. I had never owned a Seiko. I owned a Grand Seiko. We talked about that watch leaving the collection. I own an Orient, which we talked about earlier, which Seiko owns as a brand, but I've never owned Seiko proper, at least not in any recent memory. I'm trying to think if I ever had one as a kid. I don't think so. I think I had Timex. Seikos are really, really popular watches, and I was kind of at the point where I was like, you know what? I need to kind of figure out why. Now, this watch in the nomenclature of Seiko collectors, I believe, is a king turtle rather than a regular turtle because it's got a sapphire crystal. And I think there is some other stuff that maybe makes it different. I can't remember anymore, quite frankly. It still uses the 4R36 movement. This is my other day date watch. Seiko loves day dates. But I made sure I didn't get one with a Cyclops, which I'm okay with Cyclopses, but Seiko has some Cyclopses that go over the day and the date. And I just think that looks really chunky and weird, which I'm not particularly keen on. I do like how squat this kind of wears. The lug to lug is very reasonable on this watch. And I like the kind of 430-ish crown position as well. I thought that's another aesthetic of the Seiko turtle format that I thought was really cool. The bezel is also really interesting. I actually did get one that, at least at the 12 o'clock position, is aligned, which I ordered this online, so I lucked out there. But in terms of bezel play, it's very, the microphone's over here, that's why I'm going off to the side, but it's very, very subtle, very quieter in a way, and very easy to turn. So a very comfortable bezel experience, like in terms of you're someone who plays with the bezel all the time, easier to turn and than the Orient, but also quieter than like my Omega. So it's a very smooth bezel. So I was surprised. I shouldn't be. Again, these watches are very well regarded, but just in terms of how comfortable it is. And the price point on these was very approachable. In terms of the MSRP, I think I found this new online for a few hundred less, and they may go even less now at this point. This model is not limited. It was just US only, kind of like how Seiko has some watches that are technically only sold in the Japanese market, and there are ways to get them. This was part of 3 turtle shell themed US special editions. There's a brown one, and this is the more aqua blue. There's a more true blue one as well that is available. And that's pretty much it. The bracelet on this watch, much like the Orient, not a great bracelet. In fact, it's even worse to size. It's a pin and collar system, which I hate pin and collar systems. Granted, that's a one-time thing. The watch comes with both the bracelet and the strap. And the strap is I think it's a silicone strap. Very, very comfortable. The only thing is this watch, because it's got the drilled lugs, is very easy for me to play around with straps on. So I actually use this more than any other watch in terms of swapping, just because it's so easy to go ahead and do. So I've played with this on all sorts of straps. The one that the Seiko came with is really, really comfortable. The only complaint I would have with it is the keeper is metal, so I was smacking to the desk all the time. So I've tried some Barton silicones. This again is a Barton band, but this is sailcloth. Usually I end up having this on some form of silicone band because it's a dive watch, and I think it makes more sense that way. My next watch, and my most recent, is my Moser Pioneer. This is the funky blue dial black. I think they call it the blue black edition. It's a Pioneer Center Seconds, but the reason for that is the dial itself is this very fume blue. This is not... Moser has a lot of blue dials. So they have their Mega Cool watch, which is kind of that sea green, blue green color. They have, I think it's discontinued now, but they did have a Pioneer for a while with a midnight blue, which looks almost black in a lot of lower lighting conditions. They have the smaller version of the watch. This is almost 43 millimeters, but they have a smaller version closer to 40 millimeters. This is the Arctic blue, which is a lighter blue, not a baby blue. All of their watches are really, really attractive. They're very known for fume. Moser's known for a lot of stuff, but in terms of the Pioneer line, they do a lot of fume dials. And the black is the case, because the case is actually PVD coated. Still, it's a stainless steel case, but it's all blacked out. Very hardy material that they use. This is on the Moser strap, which is a vulcanized rubber. Hard for me to size it. I'm on the very end hole here, and it's still a little loose for me, which is a first. My wrist is not large. It's smaller than average, but normally I maybe at most in the second to last hole. But the vulcanized rubber, very, very comfortable. It's definitely a material I'm thinking about exploring more, because while I do like the silicone, such as those Barton bands I've talked about on some of my other watches, this is even more supple and thus in some ways more appealing. So I'd like to play around a bit with it, but it does seem to sell for more, so that's one of those things. So anyway, my most recent watch, it was an independent brand that I've been looking at for a while, but the bottom line is it's the fume dials. As I showed earlier, I have that Orient Cano with that really red dial, and it was the Moser red dials that originally caught my eye. But given I already have a red dial watch, I didn't see the need for another one. And I don't have a blue dial watch in the collection. The closest I have is that Seiko I just talked about, which is, the camera might make it look more blue than it is. It's more of a sea green to me, a blue-green. So, and I see more of the green elements in it than the blue. So because of that, I wanted something more stark, because quite frankly, it's a little weird that I don't have a blue dial watch. I've had one before. My Glashütte was a blue dial, but of course it left. I had a Vostok at one point, but it left. So hopefully this one sticks around for a while. Was in the process of doing another job change. I'm actually in that process right now. And so that, again, kind of like when I got my now gone second Rolex and got me into watch collecting, this was my excuse to go ahead and get a brand that I normally wouldn't entertain. Bought it used. If it's something you're interested in, I'd say don't get too freaked out by the MSRP on these watches, and take a look at the used market and see what you might be able to find. My next watch is my A. Lange & Söhne Lange 1. This is the watch that I got rid of so many of those 2022 watches to be able to afford. So some of them I traded, some of them I sold. It's also why I got rid of a lot of those dress watches, because I didn't see a point in owning a Cartier Santos and an IWC Portuguese and wearing the Grand Seiko, as cool as the champagne dial was on it, when I was getting this with its dial work and it's a fun big date. So again, the Glashütte, it had to go, because it's like, how many big date asymmetrical dress watches do I need? If I'm getting the Lange, I don't really need the PanoMaticLunar anymore. So I did give up the moon phase. I looked at a few of those, but this is the one that I ended up going with, which just has the big date and the power reserve. I love the format. I love the aesthetic. This was an aspirational watch for a very long period of time for me. Really, as of when I got into collecting, Lange is, of the big, quote unquote, big brands, is definitely my favorite brand. And I just always kind of ruled that out as being a reasonable option when you look at just how much money you would put into one of the watches. They do go for a lot less used, the dress watches do, than new. So it's not as bad as you think when you look at their website. But again, it's still a lot of money. But then I just sat there and I looked and I was like, how much do I have in other watches already? And it was kind of like, do I want like 6 of these, or do I want one of this? And one of this won out. So that's why I ended up getting this. My favorite dress watch to wear. I do still, as I noted, have the Reverso, and I do alternate. I do wear both. At some point, I could see myself maybe saying, let's go ahead and move the Reverso along. But, sometimes, especially if I'm running in a lot of meetings where I'm having to wear jackets a lot, I like the variety of not having just to wear the one watch. So that's why I've justified still having 2 quote unquote dress watches. I keep telling myself, and I've been good, I've not bought any more dress watches since getting this. However, dress watches are my favorite configuration aesthetically. And so it's tough because I always see these other dress watches. And I'm like, oh, those are so cool. But I remind myself, I have a Lange 1. I don't need to be going out buying every single dress watch under the sun. My penultimate watch in the collection is my Zenith Chronomaster Original. So I got this a few months ago, and it is my only chronograph in the collection. I've only ever owned one other mechanical chronograph. It was back in my 2021 video. If you want to check it out, it was a Hamilton. I did not like that watch. I really wanted to go ahead and try out an El Primero. This newer model line, or I should say the newer model of the movement, came out. And with the sweeping seconds hand that goes around once every 10 seconds in the center. And I thought that's a really cool little gimmick, little party trick. But I was a little unsure if I wanted to trust the new movement. So I waited a while. I looked at the Chronomaster Sports because I also was afraid this might be too small. However, I ultimately pulled the trigger on this because the Sports looked too much like Daytona's for me. I didn't want a Daytona clone. I wanted something that sort of stood on its own, and I think this one really does. And the sizing, even though it's a 37, 38 millimeter watch, it wears really well. It's still legible. It's possible to use the chronograph. It's fun to use. It works really well. And so I've really enjoyed this watch. It's held up. And so I wear this one quite a bit, actually. I used to wear chronographs all the time back when I had a quartz chronograph because I used to time things in one of my earlier job roles that I had. Don't really have that same work experience at this point, but I'm still partial to wanting at least one chronograph in the collection. I've not shopped chronographs since getting this one. This one has met all of my needs, so I've been very, very pleased with this. And it's likely a keeper as long as it continues to perform as it has been. And my last watch in the collection is my Olympus ProPilot X. So this is a titanium watch. It's the only titanium watch I've ever had. I got this. I remember when these came out, and I thought I really liked them. It's a weird mix of stuff because the bracelet design, and I'd say the exterior case design with the engine turning at an angle like a turbine around the bezel and also on the crown and stuff. It's like super industrial, very extreme looking sorts of stuff. More extreme even than the Pioneer Moser case. Very extreme. But the dial itself is very staid and boring, quite frankly. So in a way, it's nice because it's a go anywhere, do anything style watch. But that also means I think it probably is more appealing for someone who owns very few watches than someone like me who has over a dozen. So I do actually wear this fairly regularly. This does have the in-house movement, the caliber 400, I believe. Again, it's the only titanium watch I've ever had, so it's very light, very comfortable. I do enjoy the bracelet. I've never thought about putting this off on anything else because it's already so light. Some people aren't really into really lightweight watches. However, I think it works really well in this particular configuration. Long term, is this a keeper? I don't know. Well, I do still regularly wear this watch. The fact that it is so basic in a lot of ways, other than it's being titanium, doesn't have a whole lot necessarily going for it. My fondness for gray really keeps pulling me in with it, though. So in that regard, I have not seriously considered letting it go at this point. However, for the 2024 state of the collection, I would not be wholly surprised if this one's been moved along in favor of who knows what. Maybe in favor of just less watches at this point. That might be a good decision for me to make. So where am I going with this watch collecting thing at this point, moving forward? I don't know. I'm really just here for the ride. I said I'm pretty much done with my big moves for the year. For all intents and purposes, I am. I have set aside funds for a Rolex Submariner. I try and go off the beaten path for so many watches, but the Rolex Submariner has just been a watch I've liked for a very long time, for years and years. Probably because I vaguely remember, watching James Bond movies and Sean Connery having them, and the modern ones look a lot like the vintage ones. So I'm on a list for one of those. If it doesn't happen this year, it's just as well, quite frankly, because I feel like I've made enough watch moves between the 2022 video and the 2023 video that I don't really need another watch right now. But if that one becomes available, I will probably go ahead and acquire it. But that is the only watch that I am really looking at picking up at this time. When I got the Moser, I was looking at some other models along with it. I ended up deciding on the Moser, and that kind of meant those other ones have been pushed to the side. On the more affordable spectrum, I've been looking at a lot of Citizens. I used to have a Citizen watch for years until I had my Explorer II. My daily wear was a Citizen chronograph. I've looked at their non-chronographs, so I think the Zenith is meeting my chronograph needs, but I've definitely been liking a lot of the moves that Citizen has been making, so I've been keeping my eyes on that. I've also looked a bit at the Studio Underdog watches. I think those are pretty cool. Again, when you have as many watches as I do, going for things that are kind of extreme and doing, weird dials and stuff, more fun watches. I've got enough quote unquote boring watches. I've got my dress watches. I've got my more basic sports watches, my dives, my Oruses that are gray dialed and things like that, like the Omega. I tend to lean more conservative on watch design. So really avant-garde looks are difficult for me to get behind. But anyway, that's it for State of the Collection 2023. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. If you want to be notified when I put out new videos, I do all sorts of topics. I do live streams. I do fun stuff. We play some games. I give a lot of first thoughts on new watch releases. When I do occasionally pick up a watch, I do a watch review. Almost all of these watches, I believe, I talked to you today. I think other than Step Right Up and the Spiro Agnew watch, there are reviews on all of them on my channel. So you can subscribe and you can know when I put out stuff like that via notification. And I think that's pretty much it. If you want to comment on anything here, feel free to. I do read the comments. And otherwise, I hope you all have a really good week. And I hope you all are enjoying your watch collecting journeys as much as I have been. So take care, everybody.